Okay, we've got down to the bottom of the list where we're going to talk about control of breathing. I think it's going to be fairly close to that prediction of 90 minutes. It's taken much longer to make it because I'm not used to all this software for recording videos. But anyway, we're there. So now we talk about control of breathing. That's how we make sure that the amount we're breathing up here matches the metabolic rate down there. So we want to make sure the oxygen that's coming in at the top exactly matches the metabolic rate down the bottom. You might imagine that there'd be some system that's keeping track of how much metabolism is taking place in each cell, somehow integrating that and sending a signal saying this is how much we need to breathe. That's not how it works at all. You've really got two systems. You've got a ventilatory system and a circulatory system that both have to meet certain demands. So the circulatory system needs to make, like I said a couple slides ago, the circulatory system just needs to make sure it's maintaining the arterial pressure. Then if the metabolic rate increases, it opens up capillary beds. That means the heart's going to have to pump a whole lot harder to maintain that circulatory pressure. And that's what the heart does, keeps maintaining its pressure. The ventilatory system does the same thing. It needs to make sure that there's enough oxygen in the arteries and not too much CO2. So it monitors the arteries. If there's too much CO2, it breathes more. If there's not enough oxygen, it breathes more. So it's a fairly simple control system. Like I said, the goal is to match the oxygen supply to the metabolic rate in every tissue bed. If oxygen supply is less than demand, you'd have hypoxia, which you don't want. And if you had some crazy system where you're just breathing as much as you possibly can all the time, that's very inefficient. So how does it work? There are respiratory control centers in the pons and the brainstem. They send signals to the muscles of breathing. So you guys know that you're sitting there, you're breathing in, you're breathing out, you're not thinking about it. It's a regular signal generator sending signals to the inspiratory muscles to breathe in for a little bit, then relax for a little bit. And the strength and frequency of those are regulated by input to this center. So this center gets input, and then the amount that you're breathing dictates your alveolar ventilation. So there's many inputs to this center. There's inputs from airway receptors. So your airway might trigger, there's a piece of dust that you've inhaled. That would initiate a cough reflex. There's lung stretch receptors. So if you take a deep breath in, you start to activate stretch receptors telling you that you've breathed in to a large volume. That can actually start to send a negative feedback telling the muscles to stop contracting quite as hard. That's called the Herring-Brewer reflex. There's cognitive control, obviously, so you can right now decide to stop breathing. There's trained apneists, people who can hold their breath, who can hold their breath to the point that they pass out. That's not legal to do anymore in breath holding competitions, so you want to hold your breath as long as you can. If you're not conscious at the end of the breath hold, then you're disqualified. Pretty good thing. There's skeletal muscle receptors, so when you start exercising, as tension increases in your skeletal muscle, that sends a signal back here telling you to breathe more. There's branches for motor nerves. So when you start to exercise and you're sending motor signals down to your muscles, a branch from that comes to here. So as you start exercising, there's signals coming here telling you to start breathing more. Then there's pain centers and emotional centers. So when you see patients in emergency who are in pain or who are upset, they might be breathing a lot just because of the fact they're in pain or they're upset. So there's a whole bunch of input to the respiratory control center that can tell you to breathe more or to breathe less. So there's input from a lot of different places into the respiratory control center that drives how much you're breathing. We've already talked before that how much you're breathing or your alveolar ventilation can influence the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the arteries. If you're breathing a lot, then you can decrease the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and increase the partial pressure of oxygen a little bit. If you're not breathing enough, then the partial pressure of carbon dioxide can go up and the partial pressure of oxygen can go down. So in addition to all these inputs, you have chemoreceptors. These are located in the aorta. They're also located in the central nervous system. So they're detecting levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide all the time. You can sometimes read that those are the primary drivers of ventilation. So you increase ventilation because you get a stimulation of the chemoreceptors in response to something. That's probably really not completely true. So if you think about what happens when you go and run for a bus, you don't have a drop in PO2 in your arteries, and you don't have an increase in CO2 that's detected by your chemoreceptors that tells you to breathe more. That doesn't happen. If you take arterial blood samples while you're running for a bus, you never see hypoxia and you never see hypercapnia or increase in CO2. So probably what's happening is as you start running for the bus, your skeletal muscles are contracting, you're sending signals to your skeletal muscles, so you're sending signals to your respiratory control center saying, breathe more. And so you do, you breathe more. And if the rate at which you're breathing more is not matching your metabolic rate, then you will see a change in the arterial oxygen and the arterial CO2 pressure. Chemoreceptors will then fine-tune that. So they'll make sure that you're always breathing at the appropriate amount to keep your arterial oxygen and your arterial CO2 in the area that you like it. So respiratory control is tons of inputs to a respiratory control center which can increase or decrease ventilation, and a constant oversight by the chemoreceptor system to make sure your level of ventilation is appropriate for any given thing that you're doing. Okay, so that's it. That's the overview session. You'll get sent the link to the videos. By the time you've seen this, you've already obviously got it. And I'll have attached some other things for you to think about. And if you can think about those leading up to the large group session, then we'll have a much more interactive session online when that happens. Okay, thank you very much.